Well, from Georgina's blue skies, I'm going to take you into some dark skies for a little while. 80 years ago, victory in Europe was declared. Recent events have brought focus to Europe, and we will come back to this in a few minutes. The surrender document to deliver victory in Europe was signed near Reims on the evening of the 7th of May, 1945. The next day was a day of great celebration, but at what cost? World War II was the largest and most violent military conflict in human history. Britain lost 385,000 soldiers, sailors and airmen, and 67,000 civilians. Official casualties, sources estimate 15 million military personnel and 38 million civilians died on all sides. Much of Europe was in ruins, and the war in the Far East dragged on for another year, but at least Europe was free from Nazi terror. The German forces in Italy surrendered on the 2nd of May 1945. On the following day, a high-ranking German delegation, including a senior admiral and a senior general, appeared at the headquarters of Field Marshal Sir Bernard Montgomery, located near Lübeck on the North German plain. Typically, Montgomery, never an easy man, barked, "Who are these men? What do they want?" His aide said, "They have come to surrender the German forces in northern Germany, Denmark and the Netherlands." "In that case," said Monty, "they better come in." 5 days later, the final document of unconditional surrender was signed by General Alfred Jody on behalf of Admiral Karl Dönitz, who had taken over from Hitler in the final days of the war. The surrender document was signed at General Dwight Eisenhower's headquarters in Reims. If Victory in Europe Day drew a line under the past, the defeat of Churchill in the general elections only 2 months later sits uncomfortably with many people, but it did signal a new beginning. So why did World War II happen? What can we learn from all this, lest we fall into the trap that could lead us into war again? History has taught us that if we do not learn lessons from the past, we are likely to repeat them in the future. And the lessons to be learned from all this takes us back to the end of World War I, the Great War, that war, so-called Great War, to end all wars. The armistice was signed on the 11th of November 1918. This had come as a shock to many soldiers and civilians because the collapse of the German army, unlike World War II, was quite sudden. There are many lessons. It has often been said that lessons in the military are never learned, they are only identified, usually after a lengthy inquiry. We need to go back to the aftermath of World War I to find out what went wrong. We need to go back and look at this in more detail. After all, we all but destroyed Germany in 1918. The Treaty of Versailles was signed on the 18th of June 1919, ironically in the Hall of Mirrors, of all places, in the Palace of Versailles. The peace treaty laid out the details of the reparations that Germany had to adhere to, but it was flawed in many ways. The guilt clause in the treaty placed the complete blame of the war with Germany, something most Germans did not uphold. Remember, Neville Chamberlain, our then Prime Minister, declared war on Germany. Germany did not declare war on us. Mind you, you will remember the throwaway line in the episode of Fawlty Towers, when Basil reminds his German guests that they started the war by invading Poland. And arguably so they did. Another failing of the treaty was that it was drawn up with not one German involved. Shades today of Ukraine not being allowed to the peace table between Russia and America. The treaty required Germany to pay an equivalent of £20 billion in today's money, an almost impossible sum for a broken Germany. Britain felt the treaty was too restrictive. France, and maybe with good reason, felt it was not harsh enough. The treaty required Germany to disarm, but interestingly it was allowed to retain 6 battleships, 6 cruisers, 12 destroyers, 12 torpedo boats, and 15,000 sailors. That's half the size of today's Royal Navy. Oh, and Germany was allowed to retain an army of 100,000 men. And that's 25,000 more than the British Army has today. Most importantly, and a big loophole in the treaty, was that there were no definitive dates by which Germany had to comply with many of these requirements. One stipulation in the treaty was that Germany was not allowed to retain an air force. In the intervening years between World War I and World War II, Germany built up a fleet of passenger aircraft. Nothing against that in the treaty. But these Heinkel passenger aircraft were designed such that the passenger section of these aircraft could be removed at a stroke and converted into a bomb bay. More than 800 Heinkel aircraft, passenger aircraft that is, were built before the outbreak of World War II and then quickly converted into bombers. It appears that Britain did not see that coming, or if they did, they were unable to do anything about it. So Germany started World War II with 800 bombers. Britain had 230. Many historians claim that the combination of a harsh treaty and subsequent lack enforcement of its provisions paved the way for the upsurge of German militarism in the 1930s. The huge reparations placed upon Germany, but not enforced, coupled with the war guilt clause, fosters deep resentment of the settlement in Germany. And when Hitler remilitarized the Rhineland in 1936, a huge violation of the treaty, the Allies did nothing to stop him, thus encouraging future German aggression.